And Wise edition of Locked On Jaguars.
You are Locked On Jags, your daily Jacksonville Jaguars podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on a Monday, y'all? How y'all doing? I hope you guys had a great Mother's Day. And thank you for joining us here on Locked On Jaguars, where it's your team every day. And I thank you for making us your first listen. Reminding you guys that we are free on all platforms, wherever you get your podcast. Please like and subscribe and follow us along on the Locked On Jaguars YouTube page as well. I'm Tony Wiggins, your host of Locked On Jaguars. Just celebrated my third year with the podcast, so I'm very, very happy to be a part of the Locked On podcast family. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline, where BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And as I mentioned, you guys start here with us every single day, making us your first listen, and we are very, very grateful for that. So some of you new listeners, from time to time, I come up with my own lists. And I'm gonna tell you something real odd about me, and this is for real. For me to be a podcaster, right? I don't like debating stuff. And it's not that I don't like debating because I'm not good at it. It's like I don't like debating because I think sometimes there could be two sides to the story, and you could actually extract good stuff from each point. But usually one side is just summarily dismissed because the other person just debated well or just had a better position. I also don't like being overly analytical about things and having that actually take over what we're actually looking at. Like, for instance, Kendrick dropped a song yesterday, right? And while I'm getting used to the song and listening to it, I'm like, hey, this is fire. This is good. There were people that wanted to do a think piece on Kendrick. And I think some people look at the think piece as the art as opposed to the art being the art, right? So I'm sort of like that a little bit when it comes to watching football. But I will every now and then develop these little things in my head and these little theories. Like last year, when I was looking at the playoff teams, one of the things that I said was, you know what? What makes the 49ers, and this is the team I was particularly talking about, what makes the 49ers so good is the fact that their five players are probably as good as any five players in the league. Their best five guys, right? And I know this sounds like a good spot for a hamburger commercial, but that's not what it is. But their five guys were better than just about anybody I could think of. And I was talking about Trent Williams, Nick Bosa, Deebo Samuel, Fred Warner, and the defensive tackle, Eric Armstead. I said, they have five players. I'm not saying they're the best five players, but they have five players that will rival the top five players of any team. And then on draft night, if you watched our Locked On NFL draft special with Peter Bukowski and Eric Crocker and the boys, I said the same thing again. I said when the Jaguars drafted Travon Walker, they got a guy that when he walks out of that tunnel, physically and athletically, is just as big of a Deebo type dude, no pun intended, Deebo Samuel, but as anybody. And I think they had to improve their it level, their talent level. I think they had to improve just having that alpha come out. We haven't really seen that since 2017 when they had Jalen Ramsey and they had Calais Campbell. And to a certain extent, they had Leonard Fournette because physically those guys weren't going to let somebody just push them around. But A.J. Bouye was one of those guys. And at that point, Miles Jack was right. So they had 5 or 6 guys that physically could just match up with and you could walk out of that tunnel and they wouldn't be dominated from an athletic standpoint. Now, I know the football part of it has to catch up too. Let's just look at it like this. Look at the two teams in the Super Bowl. If I say name the top 5 players, for Cincinnati, it would be Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon. It gets a little tricky and a little dicey, but I'll even say T. Higgins. And then the other person is Hendrickson, the defensive end. And maybe Jesse Bates. So you got 6. So you can have more than 5. But when you go to bad teams and you really don't have the opportunity to get to 3 or 4 before you start naming guys that are really fringe type players, that's when you can often tell that a team isn't good. Let's do the Rams. Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Cooper Kupp. So for just those first 3, you can argue that those guys are actually the best at their position in the entire NFL. I'd say the 4th guy for them last year was Von Miller, a first ballot Hall of Famer. Even though he's older, he's still a very, very good player. And their 5th guy is probably someone, it's probably arguable a little bit, but it could have been Andrew Whitworth because he was a veteran. But if you say, give me the 5 bad A's on that team, who are they? Last year for Jacksonville, you could name 2 or 3 people that you would be happy and say, you know what? These are our 5 tough guys coming out of the tunnel. These are the guys that's going to lead our football team. It is an exercise worth doing when you go through all of the good teams that are winning in the National Football League. Now, why did I tell you that it's not really something that I love to do? Here's why. Because I've also been a barber for about 3 decades, right? And this is all we ever did. This is all we ever did was go back and forth about top 5 greatest rappers, top 5 this, Biggie or Tupac. So it kind of wears you out a little bit, and it doesn't allow you to focus on actually who and what the product is on the field. So I still like to do it, though, because in this case, I made that point last year, and I like to do it every now and then just to see as a measuring stick where the Jaguars are, because I think it's going to be telling whether or not the product on the field is going to be very good. So it's not the end all cure all for me to have a top 5 players, but it is in terms of having a reflection of what the ultimate goal is. And you can't lose sight of the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to be good on the field. And the only way you're going to be good on the field is you have to have good players. And if you only have a handful of good players, those good players have to actually be able to galvanize and lead the rest of the team. So how good are the Jaguars' top 5? I'm going to go through it, and I'm going to tell you why I think it's significant. In the 3rd segment, I'm going to give it to you and tell you why it's significant. But in the 2nd segment that we're going to be doing in just a second, I'm going to go through and name those top 5 dudes. Now, I want you to start formulating in your mind and thinking about it. Who are those top 5 guys going to be? It's all projection as far as I'm concerned. At the end of this year, when you see the tangible improvement that the Jaguars make, who are their 5 best players going to be? Who are those 5 guys you say, okay, now going into the offseason, you may add another guy, but let's just assume that the Jaguars improve enough that they're not picking in the top 7 or top 8 again this year, all right? Especially number 1 and number 2. So let's just say they have enough improvement and you start to see exactly what you want to see with this franchise, and you start to have a little bit more than hope. You have optimism that you actually can visualize them being competitive next year in 2023. Who's going to be those guys that make you feel? Who's going to be those 5 guys that make you feel? Like I said, you're not limited to just 5, but you have to have at least 5 people. And we're going to see how they stack up against the rest of the guys from around the NFL. And we'll do that here in just a second on Locked On Jaguars after I tell you about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number 1 source for all your betting stats and sports info. Now listen to me. I bet the Kentucky Derby this. I put a long shot up front too, but I took the wrong one. I took Barber Road because I'm a barber and because I like the fact that he is one of those horses that came running and charging late. Little did I know that it's 21 horse. He was 80-1. He was going to be the guy to have the trip that I thought Barber Road was going to have. But I did have 2nd, 3rd, and 4th. So I don't feel too bad about it. But maybe if I had done a little bit more studying on betonline.net, I would have known that that horse was capable of doing that. You can do the same thing for the NFL playoffs, because BetOnline is your continued source for all your sporting and wagering information, from live betting to the playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today and use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. because BetOnline is where the game starts. And y'all start here with me every day on Locked On Jaguars, and you make us your first listen. We love the fact that you do that, and I love the fact that I can say that you guys are our first listen of the day. So we're talking about the 5 players that if you had to point to them as your guys coming out of the tunnel, that's going to indicate whether or not you're going to be competitive this year. So we're just going to say we're going to assume that this year is actually going to be a better season for the Jaguars. We're going to assume that after this year, the Jaguars will no longer be considered the worst team in the NFL. We're going to assume that all the jokes are going to stop and all of the optimism and the hope that you have for this team improving, you're going to actually see it and it's going to start manifesting itself. And you're actually going to feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel for your team here in Jacksonville. When we get to that point, not if, who are the 5 alpha dogs? Who will be the 5 guys that you believe will be the guys that you'll be able to go up against any 5 guys around the league and say, my first 5 are just as good as yours, or I'm willing to go to battle with those 5 guys? I'm going to tell you, number one, and it's plain as day. I said Friday that he needed to have an improved year, but it's Trevor Lawrence. He's number 1 on the list. 1, because he's the quarterback, but 2, is because I think he's their most talented player. And this is the critical part of it. Trevor Lawrence is not only good, I think he's going to be better, but I also believe that his personality is the type of personality that will galvanize the team and actually lift guys up. So when I say you only have 5 or 6 or 7, that doesn't mean that everybody else on the team is bad. But what it can be and what it will be is the fact that he may need to throw some guys open sometime, right? He might need to actually elevate the play of some people on the team, especially at the skill positions and even in his offensive line. I think the guy at number 1 has to be that sort of dude. He does the most heavy lifting, and I think it's going to be Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is the guy that I believe is going to be the first name that you mentioned, and he should be when you're matching your 5 guys up against any other 5 guys around the league. Number 2, I might shock you on this one. It's the guy that they just picked number 1, Travon Walker. He better be. You got 2 straight number 1 picks, or number 1 overall. You pick Trevor and you pick Travon, and then that physical freak, the guy that Doug Peterson has said, regardless of who else is in the draft, he was the best fit for this team. Well, you better make sure you use him properly. And by the end of this season, people start to see the promise and the belief that Travon Walker is actually going to be the dude that all of us think and hopes that he is. Because if not, you are going to hear from it from the fan base. I'm going to hear from it because I'm a truther when it comes to Travon Walker. Everybody else isn't. Depending on how much this team wins, his stats won't matter as much as it will be when you compare them to other people. If the Jaguars start to win, and he is a key cog in their ascension out of what I call football purgatory. Number 3, it's his running mate on the other side, Josh Allen. The team has picked up the 5th-year option on Josh Allen. And there's a reason why you go get a guy like Travon Walker, because you believe it makes a guy like Josh Allen that much better. I don't know if Josh Allen is a number 1 by himself and can make the guy on the other side better. I don't know if he can, but I tell you what, I've seen him be a real good number 2 when he had a real good guy on the other side of him, and I think that's the situation. You can't tell me that if, and all of these, by the way, is barring injury, if Travon Walker is as good as advertised or as good as we think he is, and he's going to be as good as we think he's going to be, there is no reason on earth that Josh Allen should not come right along with him and go for the ride as the other guy on the other side of him, and those guys will be synonymous with each other. So we're looking at Allen and Walker, Walker and Allen, however you want to look at it. But there are 3 guys that were picked so far in the top 10, 2 number 1s and number 7. It's Trevor Lawrence, it's Travon Walker, and Josh Allen. Those are my top 3 players. My number 4 player is a new addition to this team, brought in to show up the offensive line, and that is Brandon Sherf. No stranger to the Pro Bowl, no stranger to being an All-Pro. If you have a guy with those kind of credentials on your team and he's listed as one of your 5 best guys that you walk out of that tunnel with, so be it, and I'm all good for it. Brandon Sherf, I hope he brings the toughness that everyone talks about. Everyone talks about how much of a beast he is in the waist room, in the weight room. I see, that's what I show you. I probably ate too much yesterday. I said waist room, but in the weight room, Brandon Sherf has to be one of the 5 best players on this team. Reputation wise, he already is. And if he can play and show up the interior of that line, that's going to help Trevor Lawrence. It's going to keep those big guys off of Trevor and allow Trevor to not have to leave the pocket so much. So we want Brandon Sherf to be the guy that the Jaguars paid him to be. Number 5, I had to wrestle with it for a minute because I had to go with the guy who I think will be dynamic as opposed to the guy I'm hoping to be dynamic. But remember, I told you, having more than 5 is good, but at least when you get to 5, you get to that 5th player, he has to be a guy that you can definitely see, yeah, I'll go with that. So for me, I did not choose Christian Kirk. I chose Tyson Campbell. Tyson Campbell, to me, has the makeup, the physicality, and he has a lot of momentum coming off of his rookie season last year. If Tyson Campbell can continue to develop and be the type of player that he showed promise to be at the end of last season, Tyson Campbell will flat out be one of the 5 best players on this team, easily. And one of the 5 best players that when you look at him, you can say, yeah, there he is right there. A big, long, physical, fast corner who can tackle, who got better at his awareness of the football last year, who can physically match up with any wide receiver in the league from a physicality and athletic standpoint. And that's the first thing. I think Tyson Campbell gets the nod over a guy like Christian Kirk as being someone who should develop into be one of the 5 best players on this team. Some honorable mention cats I'll give you. The rookie, Devin Lloyd. I think from an athletic profile, he's one of those types of people. I'm going to also say that Andre Cisco is going to have a big year and an improved year. Cam Robinson. These are the second 5 now. So now I'm starting to get into guys that have a little bit to prove, and you may have a question or two about. Cam Robinson is another one of those guys. You know, you wonder exactly what it is. Travis Etienne is a wild card because if he can be back to his dynamic ways where he was in college, I really believe he could be great. I don't know what James Robinson is going to be with the Achilles. I hope he's fine. But James Robinson was probably one of their 2 or 3 best players coming into last season because of the rookie season that he had. And yeah, we mentioned Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk is one of those guys that, hey, he might not be a number 1, but he's a pretty decent number 2 and slot guy. And I think he's ascending. He's earned the right to prove that he could be a top flight receiver in this league because he played second fiddle to a Hall of Famer in DeAndre Hopkins, and he did pretty good. So those are the 5 guys, and maybe a few more after that I've mentioned that I think need to be good. I'm going to get into why I think it's important, because we always talk about foundation and then elevating, and then this team always goes back and it changes its foundation again. I'll talk about all of that stuff here in segment 3 on a Monday edition of Locked On Jaguars after I tell you about Built Bar, our friends over at Built Bar. Yep, they're still going along with the best tasting protein bar you have ever had. You can get the protein bar that is sort of like a candy bar in Built Bar, and then you can get the Built Puffs. It's a marshmallow treat that is infused with protein, and they're both covered with 100% chocolate, and that's what makes them so special. What makes them really good is the fact that there's only about 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, 4 grams of net carbs, but 17 powerful grams of protein, and it just flat out tastes good. It gives you a chance to enjoy a snack that doesn't add a whole bunch to your waist like there's other things in the store that sort of taste similar, but they're all bad for you. Well, you can go to built.com and enter the promo code LOCKED15 and just see for yourself. They have an assorted amount of different flavors. I'm a personal favorite of the salted caramel, but you give it a shot and find out your favorite too, and make sure you use LOCK15 so you'll get 15% off your next order at built.com. All right, man, we're rolling along here on a Monday. Good to be back with you guys. I hope all of the moms really enjoyed Mother's Day. I hope you all enjoyed Mother's Day with your mother. And it was an awesome day for me. My daughter came in town, and I had all my kids there, even the ones that's always perpetually late to everything, but they all showed up, had us a nice dinner. Went back, believe it or not, and had a very, very quiet. We actually watched National Geographic. We were watching big cats chase prey. It was real weird day, but it was fun day because it's kind of what we all like to do, just watch stuff and learn. So I hope you learn something from this podcast every day. I hope you enjoy being here with me as much as I enjoy being here with you. Why is it so important to have 5 great players at a minimum? Well, that's because this team has had good players, with the exception of 1 year. This team has had good players, and then those good players were expected to be great. And then the players behind them that weren't that great or that wasn't that good were expected to be better than they should have been. And that's why the team has never been able to lift itself up out of what I call football purgatory. So when you have 5 or 6 guys you think are your best players, and then you realize they're not enough to lift you, you got to start over again. You got to keep going back and starting over and over again. And it seems like you can never get past second base because you're always changing your foundation. You're always changing the guys who are the leaders of the team. And I can just name them. You went from the Jalen Ramseys and Calais Campbells in about a 2 or 3 year period, and we were waiting for Nick Foles to take the helm and lead us, and then we were waiting for Gardner Minshew to just be Uncle Rico and have all of this fun, and Minshew was going to lead us, and it just doesn't happen that way. And then it was all on Trevor last year, but Trevor had to be Superman and a press secretary and a part-time coach and a chaplain and everything. No. At some point, when folks ask what's wrong with Jacksonville, leadership, they learned the hard way and they learned from mistakes, and they dumped the wrong cargo. They just didn't keep the great players that they had, and when they have had them, it's been sporadic. They've sort of been all over the place. Getting at least 5 means you get them all here at one time. That's how you win. Think about the Jaguars' history. Jimmy, Fred, Tony, Keenan, Brackens, Brunell. That's when you were successful, right? And there was another period. Stroud, Henderson, Taylor again, MJD, Rasheed Mathis. You had a bunch of them, guys in their prime. When you look at the first 5 guys, and it helps when those 5 guys are really good, because now the next group of guys, they don't have to be great. They just have to be good. So when you get those 5 linchpin guys who could be good on any roster and could stand tall against any 5 guys on any roster, it allows everything else, the responsibility sort of trickles down a little bit. But you know, when the game is on the line, who you're going to go to? Super Bowl again. What happened? Cooper Kupp. Every single time when they got into the red zone, it was Cooper Kupp. We are going to throw to our best player. He scored the game-winning touchdown. This is what happens. When Joe Burrow was trying to drive at the end of the game, what were they doing? It was Aaron Donald. It was Von Miller. Those guys are the guys who were making the bread and butter plays. And that's what has to happen for your football team. First of all, you got to get them on your roster. Until you get them on the roster, they can't affect the game. The ultimate thing is not to just measure 5 guys against 5 guys. We don't want to get derailed by that. The ultimate thing is to be able to look up and measure 5 guys and go, no, you know what they're going to do? They're going to produce on the field. The ultimate thing is what they do on the football field. That's it. Period, point blank, end of discussion. What will they do on the football field? But before you get to that point, you got to be able to identify guys, and you got to know who they are, and you got to be able to place them in the right system with the right coaches. So Trevor Lawrence, Travon Walker, who brings along Josh Allen, Brandon Sherf, and on the back end, Tyson Campbell. I think it's optimistic, but I also think it's realistic to look at those 5 guys and say, I can deal with that by the end of the year. If those guys play up to their potential, we'll have 5 guys, maybe not better than Mahomes and Kelsey and Chris Jones. And look, that's a lot to deal with. Maybe not better than all of those guys, but at the very least, knocking on the door and being able to compete. And now the guys behind them, some of those other guys I mentioned as honorable mention. Then you can start being optimistic that the Jaguars are actually putting it together as opposed to just having a guy here and a guy there. No, you want it in groups, you want it in bunches. So that's my opinion on that. I hope you guys can come up with your 5, enjoy it a little bit. It's not, like I said, it's not really something that I'm trying to debate necessarily, but you can have fun with it. But I hope you understand that this is what I've always said: when the Jaguars never are able to get past their foundation and they keep changing the foundation. And more than anything, I want those 5 guys to be considered the foundation of the future of this football team. And now we can start building on top of that, because we know those 5 guys are going to end up being perennial type Pro Bowlers, or guys that people are always talking about as amongst the best in the league at their respective positions. You guys make sure you continue to join us here. Make us your first listen on Locked On Jaguars. Also check out the Locked On NFL podcast. I host it once a week along with my friend James Rapine from Cincinnati, and that's on Wednesday, but it's still Monday through Friday, and you get all the information from the entire league and everything that's going on around the league from different perspectives. So please get used to all of the guys on the Locked On NFL roster, and make sure you tune in, like, and subscribe wherever you get your podcast. Until tomorrow, man, you guys continue to take care of each other. I am Tony Wiggins for Locked On Jaguars, and I thank you for joining us.